Message today is one that says, why did Jesus heal differently? And as I look at Jesus' healings through the Gospels, it amazes me how differently he used methods to heal. And I think with Jesus, we sometimes put human traits upon him that we should not. There were times when Jesus did absolutely nothing and was healed. Other times he required the person to wash. Occasionally he spoke healing into place. And other times he required certain steps. And well, the question I guess is for me is why the difference? Was there a reason for those differences? And I suggest to you that there was. But we're going to look at a few of those healings and see exactly what Jesus did and why he did them, or at least try to understand why he did them. Our first scripture is in John 4, verses 47 through 53. And when this man heard that Jesus had come from Judea to Galilee, he went to him and asked him to come down and heal his son, for he was given at the point of death. So Jesus said to him, "Unless you see signs and wonders, you will not believe." And the official said to him, "Sir, come down before my child dies." And Jesus said to him, "Go, your son will live." And the man believed the word that Jesus spoke to him and went away. And as he was going down, his servant met him and told him that his son was recovering. So he asked him the hour that he began to get better, and they said, "Yesterday at the 7th hour, the fever left him." And the father knew that that was the hour when Jesus had said, "Your son will live." And he himself believed, and all his household. Here is a case where Jesus simply spoke the word. He didn't have to go. He didn't have to do any additional acts. His word was enough. Being God, that shouldn't surprise us. And yet, not every healing was spoken just like this. In fact, many healings had a variety to them that seems to be odd. In Luke 8, 42 through 48, it says, "For he only had one daughter, about 12 years of age, and she was dying. As Jesus went to the people pressed around him. And there was a woman who had been in discharge of blood for 12 years. And though she had spent all her life living on physicians, she could not be healed by anyone. She came up behind him and touched the fringe of his garment, and immediately her discharge of blood ceased. And Jesus said, 'Who was it that touched me?' When all denied it, Peter said, 'Master, the crowd surrounds you and are pressing in on you.' But Jesus said, 'Someone touched me, for I perceived that power had gone out from me.' And when the woman saw that she was not hidden, she came trembling and falling down before him and declared the presence of the people that she had touched him and how she had immediately been healed. And he said to her, 'Daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace.'" This one is a unique healing, because it implies that there was no direct intent for Jesus. Now, there are many scholars who debate this as to whether Jesus actually knew who this woman was and why she did what she did. Some scholars would say, yes, he knew already, and he was simply pointing it out so that his disciples would understand what had just gone on. Others would argue that Jesus, being human, had limited understanding, and he may not have known. Be it as it may, this is a case where Jesus does not seem to have the intent to heal while the healing is taking place. It's the woman's faith and desire to be healed that is put her in that position and has healed her, as Jesus said. This woman's faith is a big part of her healing. And it had absolutely no outward actions from Jesus to accomplish it. But it's interesting to note that while this took absolutely no action from Jesus, he was taking the action of traveling to heal another. And so one healing took zero action, the other healing took action of travel, which in those days on foot meant some time. Matthew 9, 27 through 29 looks at another totally different situation. And Jesus passed on from there, and 2 blind men following cried out loudly, "Have mercy on us, Son of God." And when he entered the house, the blind men came in him, and Jesus said to them, "Do you believe that I am able to do this?" And they said, "Yes, Lord." Then he touched their eyes, saying, "According to your faith, it is done." Here is a healing where Jesus has a condition. Do you believe? Do you have faith? It seems, and I question whether or not, that this would be a situation where if they said, "No, we don't believe so," that this would be difficult for Jesus. I don't believe that to be the case. In fact, what I see is Jesus testing their faith and asking. But then Jesus does lay hands on him. It's almost as if he's giving them a test prior to their healing. The next healing we look at is in Mark 8:22 through 25. And they came to Bethsaida, and some people brought to him a blind man, begging him to touch him. And he took the blind man by the hand and led him out to the village. And when he had spit on the eyes and laid his hands on him, he asked him, "Do you see anything?" And he looked up and said, "I see people, but they look like trees walking." Then Jesus laid his hands on the eyes again, and he opened up his eyes, and his sight was restored, and he saw everything. This is a unique one because not only does Jesus take him outside the village, perhaps because the idea of making mud from spit would be repulsive to those inside the village, but it also indicates that there's a process here. And the sight was not immediately restored. And I think that too often when people read that scripture, they go, well, this was just a harder case of blindness for Jesus to heal. And I don't think that is correct. I don't believe that this healing was limited by God's ability, because he does, in fact, heal without even intending, as with the woman with the discharge. What it does suggest to me is that there is something different within the individual being healed. There is a process. The next scripture I want to read is John 9:6 through 7. And having said these things, he spit on the ground and made mud from the saliva. And when he anointed the man's eyes, he said to him, "Go wash in the pool of Siloam," which means sent. So he went and washed and came back seeing. Here again, mud on the eyes is used. Why? There's only 2 cases of it in the Bible. It's not like this is the standard practice. And in this case, he is not told to simply open his eyes, but he is told to go to the pool of Siloam and wash. Now, the pool of Siloam was also a pool that was known for its healing process. Once again, Jesus is putting processes into his healing. And I think as we look at that, it definitely raises questions. It does for me, and I suspect it does for you. And I don't think that I can answer them completely, although I will try to do the best that I can. My suspicion is that those healings are different, not because of Jesus' power or because of the illness being more severe or less severe, but because of the individuals being healed. Just exactly what it was about those individuals that are being healed that was unique. God could have simply spoken it or even simply thought that healing into place. The fact that some healings took more steps suggests that the individual being healed needed just a little bit more time. I have seen this in my own life and in the lives of others. I have seen Christians who were alcoholics who prayed to God and said, "Please heal me from alcoholism." And they confessed that they've never had the desire for alcohol again. It was an immediate one step, no problem. But I know others who struggle with that desire for the rest of their lives. Is one healing better than the other? I would say no. The truth of the matter is, it is up to the individual as to how much they can accept and how much they can deal with in the healing process. I can tell you from my own experience and my own healing in my own life that the battle of anger and unforgiveness was a very lengthy process. Could God have simply wiped that away from me at age 17? Yes, he could have. But it took some 20-some or 30-some, and perhaps even if you want to be really technical, still is going on, even at age 68, to heal those problems in my life. Why is that? Well, God could, like I said, have done it in just in a moment. But was I ready? Was I willing to accept that healing? Was I able to deal with that healing and able to grasp it? Or did I need a growth process? You know, so often when it comes to healing a physical injury, we all know you break a bone, it takes time to heal. You cannot just sit there and go, it's done. Now, I can take a cut and I can go get stitches or have it super glued shut and my bleeding stops immediately. But something that is broken, it takes a little time for my body to heal that. I would suggest to you that as human beings, there are often times in our life that the healing, because of our own makeup, our own design, takes a little longer. I wish it didn't. I would love to tell you that every time you pray for healing, it's immediate. But I can tell you that is not the case. There are many Christians who have prayed for healing and not received it. One of the most profound ones is Joni Eareckson Tada, a young teenage girl who dove into a pond as a 16-year-old, I believe she was, and she fractured her neck. And she's been a paraplegic ever since. She's now in her 70s. She has prayed many times to be healed of her paraplegic. She's also suffered breast cancer. She's also suffered many decades of pain and illness. Her prayers for healing seemingly going unanswered. But I would suggest to you that if you had a sit down with Joni Eareckson Tada today and ask her, is God healing you? And she would say yes. My physical healing will not probably take place until heaven. Why? Why not? Wouldn't it be such a wonderful testimony for her to stand up after 60 years of paraplegic and start running? Wouldn't that be a wonderful ministry? Wouldn't that be a miracle that everybody would go, wow? The problem is, Joni Eareckson Tada has a wonderful ministry in a wheelchair. In part because of her injury, because of her limitations. She can preach faith about God with an authority that very few people have. For her to be able to trust in God's wisdom and discernment and healing in a wheelchair speaks to someone like me who battles with much smaller battles very loudly. And this is something we see in Paul's life. Our next scripture is 2 Corinthians 12, verses 8 through 10. Paul, too, had a request for healing that seemingly went unanswered. This is 3 times I pleaded with the Lord about this, that it should leave me. But he said to me, my grace is sufficient for you. My power is made perfect in weakness. Therefore I will boast more gladly in my weakness, so that the power of Christ may rest upon me. For the sake of Christ, then, I am content with weakness, insult, hardship, persecutions, and calamities. For when I am weak, then I am strong. Paul asked 3 times for the thorn in his side to be taken from him. He very much desired that healing. And God's response may have seemed to Paul, I know it feels that way to me when I hear it, my grace is sufficient for you. I don't know about you, But there have been a few times in my life where I go, God, that ain't a good enough reason. I want a better reason. Show me why you won't do this. Show me why you will not do this. And I think that Paul probably was in that same position, because we see Paul answer that question in that scripture. He says, therefore I will boast more gladly in my weakness, so that Christ's power may be rest upon me. For the sake of Christ, then I am content with weakness, insults, and persecution. For when I am weak, I am strong. I don't know about you, but I don't feel strong when I'm weak. I don't feel good when I'm suffering. I don't feel good when I desire healing and don't receive it. But I will tell you this, especially with people like Paul and myself, because I'm a do-it-myself kind of guy. Most of my life, I've done it by myself. When I needed help on the farm physically, I would oftentimes just say, step back and watch me do it. And I'd have people go, boy, you're going to hurt yourself. At age 68, I can attest to the words of wisdom of those gentlemen that said that, because I did hurt myself. I'm suffering pain and injury to my body because I was too tough to accept help. I would do it myself and I would prove them wrong. I trusted in my own strength, but not God's. Paul was that kind of individual. And when he says that I am the strongest when I am the weakest, what Paul is acknowledging, what I am trying to learn myself, and what I am hopefully going to allow you to understand a little better, is that sometimes you are your strongest when you're at your weakest. When you simply rely on God, when you simply have the ability to trust God. You know, the problem is, coming from the home that I came from, I was a man who craved control. I had this delusion that said, if I can control everything around me, I can limit people hurting me. I can limit the number of times that I'm hurt. And I'm here to tell you that I know plenty of people who feel that same way. And the problem with that idea is it's delusional at best, and at worst it's an outright lie. You have no control over your own lives or those around you. God demands you surrender control over to Him. And I will tell you, that's a big ask for somebody like me. I want control. I want an ability to maintain. I want the ability to react and do something about the reactions that I'm in. But no matter how much I struggle to have control, and trust me, I spent a lot of years fighting with God for the control of my life. The realization that in a second, everything can change. The moment Johnny Erickson Tada drove off that platform, her life was never going to be the same. I can walk out this door and be hit by a car and never be the same. I can just go to the doctor and have him say, by the way, you have an illness, a cancer. You do not, no matter how much you want to have control, you do not have control even over the smallest things. And like I said, I have struggled with that concept so much in my life. In fact, I suggest to you I still struggle with it. I want complete healing. But if I trust God and He chooses not to give me complete healing, do I trust Him? Notice how many times Jesus asks, do you believe? Do you want me to heal you? I can often be my own biggest obstacle to healing. because I have spent decades fighting and arguing with God over control, over desire of my plan over His. And I think so often, when I look at my own life and when I look at the lives of others, I see us in a process of growth. It's a process of testing and growing in faith. It is not always easy. It's not always instantaneous. And oftentimes, healing can be painful. Any of you who have ever gone to physical therapy know that it's hard and it is painful. I've often joked with many physical therapists, do you love getting paid to hurt people? Because that's what it seems to be. They're there to hurt me. They're here to cause me pain. But they would argue that unless you have that pain, unless you stretch those injured muscles, unless you push and go through the pain, you will not receive full healing. My friends, the same is true with God. Sometimes healing is a process. And like many cases, sometimes that healing can and will be painful. I can tell you many, many tears have been shed over my life. One of the most ironic parts of my counseling was my counselor gave me a children's book, the kind of book you give to a 2-year-old and read to a 2-year-old. And it was on the love of a father and mother. She goes, I want you to read this 10 times this week. And I read it through the first time and I'm thinking, this is stupid. Why would she give me this book? The second and the third time, I got angry. Why would she give me this book? Knowing my background, why? The fourth and fifth time, or sixth time, I started to cry because I realized what I did not have. By the 7th and 8th and 9th time and the 10th time that I read that book, I started to understand why she had me read that book. I had to acknowledge what I did not have. I had to grieve it. I had to understand the pain that I suffered and realize that it was real and accept that. And then understand that that's not where God wanted me to stay. That He had a bigger plan, a better plan. I did not understand. But part of my healing was to go through that process of pain, to go through that process of questioning. Now, I'm here to tell you that Paul's answer is not the answer I want. If God says my grace is sufficient, can I and will I trust Him? I'll be honest with you. There are times where I don't want to. But a question is being asked of you and me today. And I will suggest to you that your answer to that question, is my grace sufficient enough for you, may very well determine the speed of your healing. Much of my healing process has taken decades. And I will suggest to you that why that took decades to do wasn't because Jesus was limited. It was because I was putting myself in place of God. I was telling God how it should go. I was explaining to God how it should be. I had a vision of what it should look like. And as long as it was about me and my desires, God could not and would not completely heal me. I'm age 68. I'm a long time past my father's abuse. And yet I am still healing from it. I can tell you about the healing that I have received. And I often used forgiveness and healing analogy or metaphor like an onion. Put an onion on your counter and let it sit for a couple of days. And you come back and you will see a dry layer on that onion. You take that dry layer because it's no good anymore. It's dead. You peel it off. And you wait a few more days and another layer will appear. Oftentimes, forgiveness and healing are much like that onion. You peel it one layer at a time. You are healed one layer at a time. I may pursue and desire instantaneous healing. But if God chooses a slower process, will I accept it? Is it frustrating? Yeah. I am sure Johnny Erickson Tada would love to get out of that wheelchair and never return to it. But I guarantee you that one day she's going to go into the presence of God, and there are no wheelchairs in heaven. There will be no need for a wheelchair in heaven. Her healing may not take place completely until she receives that first sight of Jesus face to face. Some of my healing may not take place until I see Jesus face to face. Am I okay with that? Or do I question it? Or do I get resentful and desire, like Paul, take this thorn from me? The truth of it is, my friends, oftentimes my healing is determined on the question that Jesus asked. Do you believe I can? And do you really want me to? I can tell you, especially with my unforgiveness, I had too long a period of time where if God had asked me, do you really want me to heal you from being an unforgiving individual, I would have said, no, I'm pretty happy with the anger that I have. I'm right, I'm just, I was wronged, this was an evil thing, and you know what? I'm not sure I want to be forgiven for that. They need forgiveness. That's not something I need forgiveness for. My friends, that was a lie I told myself for far too long. And it slowed my healing process because I believed that lie far too long. When I finally got to the point where I said, you know what, Lord? This ain't healthy for me. This ain't healthy for anybody around me. Even the people that I love the most are suffering because I refuse to forgive. My anxiety, my stress, my frustration didn't go against my father because we really didn't have a relationship. But ironically, it did come out with my wife, my children, my coworkers. That frustration that I had wasn't going against the individual that had wronged me. It was going against people I loved and cared about. People I thought that I was trying to do the best for. That denial not only hindered my healing, but it may well have injured others. I'm here to tell you, my friends, God heals. Now, He may not heal in the exact same way you want Him to heal. It may not be that you get healing in this earth, but He heals. If you trust Him, if you're willing to accept that healing, He can and does still heal. But do not expect a cookie-cutter healing. Do not say, I look at this woman walking on the road, and without even asking for it, I received healing, and said, that's the healing I want. Because Jesus doesn't give you that option. Each of these individuals were healed in a different fashion, in a different form, and I would suggest it's because they were all different people, with different backgrounds and with different loads on their shoulders. You and I come to Jesus in that same way. We can and we will receive healing if we're willing, and we're willing to accept that He can. But it is a process. And it can, I can tell you from experience and from speaking from Paul, it can be frustrating. There are times when God says, my grace is sufficient. You can handle a wheelchair. You can handle an injury. You can handle a problem that you've felt with all your life, because my grace is sufficient. Not the answer I want. But if that's the answer God gives me, do I trust him? It's a question we need to ask ourselves, because unfortunately we all are in need of healing. And God does answer differently to each of us. So thank you.